it's tricky with the geography of King's Landing because obviously we concentrate all these seasons on the seaward side of it all, and then here we are inventing a landward side, which obviously it has to have because it's not an island, but it's always one of those, you're just jumping into the unknown a little bit for what something should look like.
Well, we ended up using plates from season 7, Lady Oleana's castle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, her window view when the Lannister troops are closing in, and that became the set extension for the land side of King's Landing. But it's the same thing we did with Frozen Lake and the Icelandic mountains to top off the quarry, and gosh, it worked really well. So this is Spain, actually, that you're seeing in the background there.
Right. Okay. Well, I remember that location for the, when as you said, the troops were outside that castle.
Yeah, it's very nice to have something like a mountain with a particular shape. And we did that with Battle of the Bastards, too. A mountain that drops off abruptly because you notice it, and then you sort of can orient yourself very quickly. And then the mountain that you see in the distance on the right, we were looking at the Oleana's carriage shot from season 4, I think, and just trying our best to make sense of all of the different, all of the times that we've seen King's Landing in different views. And each one has, served its own story moment, so there was no thought of how to all fit together.
This was a major question that came up in season 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones. Why does the landscape around King's Landing look radically different compared to earlier seasons? This wasn't just a few elements of niche fandom, the hyper-obsessive detail types. Mainstream news was reporting on this in their weekly Game of Thrones stuff. Why is the landscape noticeably different to casual audiences? And this has been fully answered by the Blu-ray commentary. 2 halves to it. Point 1, why does the King's Landing landscape look different? Because they substituted in the Highgarden backgrounds. This is the background Highgarden landscape from when Olenna is looking out her window. They straight up admitted that. This isn't something new they did to make it more accurate to the books or to take into account something about local filming geography. They cut and paste in the Highgarden backgrounds. Second half is, why did they substitute in Highgarden? Well, Joe Bauer, I sympathize with the way he explained it. Joe Bauer joined this show in season 3. He was not here from the beginning. And this is a problem that was already ongoing, that Benioff and Weiss made no real attempt to keep the landscape around King's Landing consistent from one season to the next. As I am one of the obsessive online fans, like for fan wikis and stuff, we would try to make maps, people making 3D maps of TV show King's Landing. There are good maps of book King's Landing anyway, because it's a major location. But we'd realize, that mountain is on the left in one episode, it's on the right in the next. It was still, to the casual viewers, thought, oh yeah, I vaguely remember there were coastal cliffs behind it in the horizon line. If you really scrutinized it, they weren't consistent. So as Bauer explained, he tried researching this, and this was going on before he even joined the show. They were never consistent about this, and as he said, based on how pretty they wanted a certain shot to look from one episode to the next, they'd just draw a new one with no thought to what had come before. Even though the VFX guys were kind of nudging them, guys, if we ever need to show a land army approaching King's Landing, not from the shore like Stannis did in season 2, but from the land, we have to make a mirror image of that. A reverse shot, in 3 dimensions, keeping track of which mountains are where. This was a looming problem for years, and they just kept ignoring it, slapping in different landscapes as they would from one season to the next inconsistently. So come season 7, they were told, okay, now we're going to show a land army approaching King's Landing from the west side, not the east on the coast in the ocean. Make a reverse shot. And from what, the 4 or 5 contradictory versions that we have? So season 7 going in season 8, the schedule Benioff and Weiss gave the VFX crew was beyond absurd. It was ridiculous. We've heard nightmare reports of this. In other clips I'm going to post, they said, we were working officially 6 days a week, 18 hours a day, but usually 7 days a week. And they didn't even finish the VFX for the finale until early May. So like when you saw the Long Night episode, they hadn't even finished the VFX yet. And there's other clips of Sapochnik directly complaining in the post-finale interviews. They would not listen, the showrunners, to when we tell them the schedule you've given us makes no sense. It is impossible to finish within this deadline. Same thing was going on in season 7, though not quite to the extent of season 8, that you're making everyone work overtime. You have no concept of time, that this is not going to fit in. And you planned out the early seasons so poorly that you should keep track of King's Landing is a major location, like more so than the books because it's so concentrated. Something like half of the scenes in earlier seasons take place in King's Landing just because, they condensed things that happen in Renly's army camp will happen in the city, that sort of thing. That, wow, maybe we should keep track of the landscapes. That sitting down, faced with 4 or 5 contradictory versions he could never reconcile, and bigger issues like making a zombie army, all the other special effects, and dragons and direwolves. If they couldn't even put the direwolves and they had to limit the dragons, you'd think that background mountain landscapes were at a top priority. So this isn't the fault of the VFX team. This is poor planning by Benioff and Weiss, ignoring their direct complaints for years that you need to pick one Horizon Line version and stick with it. They just keep going, no, draw it differently this time. We established it doesn't look like that. So when faced with making reverse shots from the land side, they basically said, screw it, we do not have time for this. We'll cut corners and just substitute in Highgarden. I don't blame them for that, the VFX team, that, look, Benioff and Weiss, if you're not going to take this seriously and you're going to ignore all of our complaints, we're not going to take it seriously either. That if you don't want a consistent, and we were warning them, you have to plan out what this looks like from 360 degrees, then we'll just substitute in the Highgarden backgrounds. And I tried showing that in these images here. You see there's that little dip in the mountains, which I'm highlighting with a red line there. That's it there at Highgarden, and there it is behind the armies approaching the city in seasons 7 and 8. And the weird thing is, the east side is the ocean, and the south side is a river, which means they're either approaching from the west or from the north, and there are 7 gates to King's Landing. If they were approaching from the north, the compass is upside down, so the east would be on their left-hand side. But when you see Tyrion walking to the gate to confront Cersei, there's mountains on his left-hand side. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that, okay, for whatever reason, they wanted to approach from the west. Just by process of elimination, it's the only one that vaguely makes sense. The mountains, the background for Highgarden that they just copy-pasted in here, it's not even consistent. In episode 4 of season 8, when Tyrion is walking towards the gate, that little dip in the mountains, that Highgarden design, that is on his left-hand side. So let's say those are to the north of the city because they're approaching from the west. That someone walking to the gate would see them on their left. But then the next episode, 8.5, one episode later, when the combined Northern Vale Dothraki Unsullied army is directly facing the gate, and it's implied to be the same gate, that little dip in the mountains in the background is now directly behind them. So is that little dip in the mountains opposite from this gate, or is it perpendicular to this gate, that it should be on their left when facing the gate like it was for Tyrion last episode? And yet maybe they came to a different gate, but then the ocean would be on their left-hand side, or the river. That There was no thought to this, and they're slapping in, copy-pasting the Highgarden background, because so many other things were falling apart on this show. I don't blame the special effects team. It's when we fans were saying things like, wow, in Season 1 you should be keeping track of the landscape. You should be keeping track of introducing Jane Poole quickly enough for later storylines. Season 3 or 4, you should really take care to start setting up the Dornish storyline properly, or that stuff with Stannis that's going to happen by Book 5. And we were ignored, as, oh, you silly fans with your trivial things. And then suddenly by Season 8, we get randomly disappearing mountains, which are obvious to casual audiences, and obvious plot holes. And suddenly no one can think of what to say. So once again, it's just due to poor, non-existent future planning, they slapped in the Highgarden backgrounds.